Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely pivotal moment in history. We're going to explore how the darkest, absolute, deadliest year in aviation history ended up becoming the very foundation for the safety rules that protect every single modern airline passenger today. It's a story of devastating loss for sure, but it's also about incredible resilience, massive engineering reform, and an unbreakable commitment to making sure the tragedies of the past are never, ever repeated.
All right, let's get right into it. If you think back to the early 70s, or, just look at the ads from that era, flying had never looked safer or more glamorous. The jets were enormous, airlines were household names, and buying a ticket meant buying into this amazing, luxurious experience. But the reality behind the scenes? It tells a shockingly different story. 1974 completely shattered that golden illusion. In just 12 months, over 2,400 people lost their lives in the air. The industry would ultimately call it the worst year it had ever known. But to really understand how we built the incredibly safe system we enjoy today, we have to look closely at what actually broke down that year.
Section 1. Engineering flaws and corporate choices, focusing on Flight 981.
So, tracing this timeline shows us we're not just looking at random, unavoidable accidents here. We're looking at deep, systemic flaws. And it starts with a terrifying collision between a known mechanical issue and corporate greed on a Turkish Airlines DC-10, Flight 981. Just walk with me through this agonizing timeline for a second. Back in 1972, a fuselage engineer named Dan Applegate wrote a memo literally warning that the DC-10 cargo doors had a fatal design flaw. He knew they could pop open midair and cause a catastrophic floor collapse. Well, his boss read it, entirely agreed, but realized fixing it might leave their company footing a massive bill. He actually called it an interesting legal and moral problem, and then he chose the legal side. That memo sat hidden in a drawer for 20 long months. Instead of an official public directive to ground and fix the planes, they made a private, voluntary understanding just to avoid bad press. And the result of that normalization of deviance? In March 1974, Flight 981's cargo door failed over Paris, and 346 lives were lost in an instant. Now, this specific number is just chilling. 13 pounds. Because of that under-the-table understanding to just make voluntary fixes, Flight 981 completely slipped through the cracks. The door mechanism was misrigged. And it took a mere 13 pounds of pressure for a baggage handler in Paris to force the locking handle shut with his knee. He felt absolutely nothing unusual. But that tiny amount of force completely bypassed the warning system, making the cockpit light go dark even though the latches weren't actually secured. So, at 11,500 feet, the pressure blew the door right off. The cabin floor collapsed, and it completely severed the control cables. Moving on to Section 2, deadly miscommunications in flight, looking at Flight 514. It is wild to think about, but two highly trained pros can hear the exact same words and come away with totally, fatally opposite beliefs. Let's look at a wet December morning with Flight 514, heading toward Dulles Airport in a heavy storm. The captain heard the air traffic controller say, "Cleared for the approach." To the captain, this was like a comforting blanket of security. He interpreted those exact words to mean the controller was actively watching them on radar. He fully believed he was being safely guided and that it was completely fine to descend to 1,800 feet. But on the flip side, to the controller, cleared for the approach meant something else entirely. To him, it meant he was handing navigation and terrain clearance completely back to the flight crew. He just assumed the pilots would read their own charts and make sure they didn't hit the mountains below. This total gap in meaning, combined with some seriously confusing approach charts, caused Flight 514 to strike Mount Weather. And what makes this just heartbreaking is that another crew had a near miss on that exact same mountain weeks earlier for the exact same reason, but their warning never made it past their own company's mailbox. Section 3. Navigating in the dark and the limits of technology. You've got to remember, in 1974, flying beyond the reach of radar meant pilots were practically navigating in the dark, relying on some deeply flawed instruments. Let's break down how this actually worked over places like the Pacific Ocean. Crews used an automatic direction finder, or ADF. Basically, you tune two receivers to a ground beacon, watch the needles point to the station, wait for them to swing behind you to confirm you passed it, and then compare both needles because, get this, they were notoriously unreliable. They could be bent by weather or terrain. On Pan Am Flight 812 in Bali, one needle swung but the other didn't. They completely disagreed. The crew, trying to shorten their approach in the dark, trusted the wrong needle. They turned early, gave up their certainty of where they were, and tragically struck a mountain. And, human eyes can be just as easily tricked as those clunky instruments. This brings us to what's known as the black hole approach. It is a terrifying optical illusion. When you're making a night landing over dark water or unlit terrain, the total lack of visual references makes the runway appear lower than it actually is. This naturally tempts pilots to fly way lower than they should. This exact illusion led a veteran pilot, a guy with 17,000 hours of experience, to crash Pan Am Flight 806 in Samoa. He flew a perfectly functioning aircraft short of the runway. The impact itself was entirely survivable, but 97 people lost their lives because of the resulting fire.
Section 4. Distraction in sterile cockpits. Analyzing Flight 212.
Now we're shifting to perhaps the most mundane, yet frustratingly relatable cause of tragedy, just everyday professional distraction. Let's look at the human element on Eastern Airlines Flight 212. The juxtaposition here is honestly incredible. They're hurtling towards Charlotte through a thick layer of ground fog, and this highly experienced crew completely abandons their required altitude callouts. Instead, the cockpit voice recorder picked them up casually debating the politics of Richard Nixon's pardon, then chatting about used cars, and finally, during literally the most critical phase of the approach, they're arguing about whether some structure sticking out of the fog was an amusement park tower. Just moments later, they clipped the trees 3.5 miles short of the runway. 1,350 feet. That's the altitude they actually crossed their final fix at. Literally 450 feet too low. Because they were so deeply distracted by their conversation, the crew misread their dual display altimeter dials. They read the hundreds dials correctly, but just mentally filled in the wrong thousands number. It was a remarkably simple human error, magnified by casual distraction, that led to 72 deaths in what should have been a routine 35-minute hop. But here is the incredibly important, satisfying resolution that came out of all that unimaginable loss: the sterile cockpit rule. This new, strict standard is a direct result of Flight 212's casual banter. It strictly prohibits flight crews from doing any non-essential duties or having off-topic conversations below 10,000 feet. It essentially mandates absolute silence and total laser-focused professionalism during the most critical, vulnerable phases of a flight.
Finally, Section 5. The Legacy of 1974.
So what does this all mean for us today? The crucial point is that 1974 was absolutely devastating, but it wasn't in vain. When we map out this incredible evolutionary arc, we see that because of Mount Weather, we now have mandatory ground proximity warning systems that give pilots a crucial 10-second warning before hitting terrain, plus a totally standardized aviation vocabulary. Because of Flight 212, we have the sterile cockpit rule. Because of the Paris air disaster, we have pressure equalizing vents in cabin floors and entirely redesigned cargo doors. And because of the confusion in the dark skies, approach charts were redrawn to be completely unambiguous. Literally every single time you step onto an airplane, you are actively being protected by these specific innovations. I'm going to leave you with this thought. These rules, these technologies, they were quite literally written in the aftermath of 1974. So the next time you're sitting in a cabin that suddenly grows quiet as you descend below 10,000 feet, or you hear a subtle chime from the flight deck, take a moment. Will you remember the unseen history, the hard-learned lessons, and the human resilience that is actively protecting your journey? It's a fascinating, sobering, yet ultimately inspiring legacy. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.